Okay, the next decision-making scenario is the optimum use of scarce resources. So this just means that we have limited amount of resources and we have to decide which products do we prioritize. So in order to do this, first of all, we need you to recall a couple of previous terms. So the first one is contribution per unit. See, you can remember the formula for that. The selling price take with the variable costs per unit. And see if you can remember the contribution sales ratio. It's the contribution per unit divided by the selling price. Okay, so like I just said, scarce resources, which we can also call limiting factors, the aspects of a business which limit output, and that's usually due to insufficient amounts for the demand. So all that means is we haven't got enough of a resource to produce all the units we want to produce. So we might have to prioritize different products, and we'll look at how do we decide which ones to prioritize. So different examples of these kind of resources, they could have materials. So we might have limited materials to produce our products. Labor, so the number of hours available. We might not have enough staff to produce all our products. Productive capacity, so that means our machines, for example, our machines might only be able to work for so many hours. Storage, we might only be able to store so many products, so we have to decide which ones to prioritize. Finance, we might not be able to afford to produce all the ones we want to produce. And the quantity of the output that can be sold. So we might not be able to sell all of our products. So at any one time, there's usually one main scarce resource. So businesses must minimize the effect of this, and they do this by optimizing resources and maximizing profits. So we're going to look at a process that allows us to do that. So if there's no limiting factor, so if we've got enough of everything, then we should prioritize the product that maximizes the contribution sales ratio. So we choose a product with the highest contribution sales ratio. However, like I said, there's normally at least one main limiting factor, scarce resource. So that's not usually the case. So if that happens, if there is a limiting factor, then we should maximize the product with the highest contribution per scarce resource. So for example, if my scarce resource is hours, so labor hours, I would choose the product that's got the highest contribution per hour. And that hopefully makes sense. You get the most contribution per that resource. And once we've maximized that product, we should then move on to the next one, the next highest one. And that makes sense. So we keep going through them. So the highest one first, then the second highest one, and the third one. And in case you're wondering how do you work out the contribution per scarce resource, well, you just do the contribution per unit as normal, divided by the number of scarce resources needed. So if my product gives me £40 contribution per unit, and it takes 2 hours to make, then I would say that's £20 per hour for that unit. So there's kind of three main stages for answering these questions. And the first stage is filling in the table that looks a bit like what's on the board now. Now, I'm not going to talk through each individual thing right now because it's best doing an example together. But you should recognize the layout is very similar to our marginal costing up until the contribution per unit. And then instead of working out profit, we work out the contribution per resource, so per hour, per kilo, per meter, whatever our resource is. We rank them in order. Then we look at how many do we expect to be able to sell. Then we look at how many units, how many resources are needed. Like I said, I'll do an example to go through this. The second stage is to work out how many of each product we should make using an optimum production plan. And again, I'll go through an example. And then if we needed to, we might need to make an income statement. And we know the layout for that using a marginal costing basis. Start with sales, take away variable costs to get the total contribution, take away the fixed costs, and that gives us that profit or a loss if we're unfortunate. So an example. So press pause, you can read that yourself. So the scenario is they've got one machine to make these 3 jackets. They've got the selling price is given to you, the materials is given to you £12 per meter. Now, if you notice, it says leather's £36 direct material. If that's £12 per meter, that means the leather needs 3 meters, for example. That's what that means. And the direct labor, £12 per hour. For leather, it's £18, so that means it needs an hour and a half to make it. But we'll touch on that a bit more. The expected annual demand, so how many they expect to be able to sell during the year. And it says at the bottom, only 33,000 labour hours are available per annum. And the 2 things we have to work out. We have to work out the contribution per labour hour for each jacket and make an optimum production plan to maximise profit. So 10 marks in total for doing that. So I'm going to split this up into 6 steps. So the first step is what is a limiting factor of a scarce resource. So hopefully you can spot that yourself and you can see that the thing we're limited by is the labour hours. So we've only got 33,000 labour hours. The second one, we calculate the contribution per unit using the layout on the board. So we fill in the selling price, the direct materials and the direct labour per unit, just using the numbers from the question. We can work out the total variable cost just by adding the direct materials and direct labour, because they are variable costs, adding those together. And then to get the contribution, remember contribution is the selling price, take away the variable cost per unit. So for leather, for example, I do 114, take away 54. So for leather, I would get 60, sports 15, flak 42. So that's my contribution per unit. So at the minute, that's not taking into account how many hours it takes to make each one. That's just the contribution per unit. So at the minute, if we had as many hours as we wanted, then we would look at that and we think, right, which one would we prioritize? So have a think, which one do you think we prioritize? So you might think that the leather gives us the highest contribution, so prioritize that. However, the one we want to prioritize is the one that's got the highest contribution sales ratio, which is in fact the flak. 42 over 72 is much higher than the other contribution sales ratios. Step 3 is we are limited by the hours though, so you need to work out how many hours, so how much of the scarce resource is needed per unit. So it says in the question that those costs there are £12 per hour. So we need to work out how many hours does it take to make a leather jacket, a sports jacket, and a flak jacket. Well, £12 per hour, and leather takes 18 hours. So to work out how many hours, we do 18 divided by 12. Sports takes 24 hours, £12 per hour. So that's 2 hours, 24 divided by 12. And flak, it costs £12, and it is £12 an hour, so that must be 1 hour. So I filled in that row of the table. 1.5 hours for leather, 2 for sport, 1 for flak. Step 4, we calculate the contribution per scarce resource. So that means how much contribution do I get per hour. So they're the 2 last rows you should have filled in, the contribution per unit and the labour hours per unit. So leather, for example, it's £60 contribution per unit, but it takes 1.5 hours to make. So the contribution per hour, well, I'm just going to do 60 divided by 1.5, so it makes £40 per hour. Similarly, sport, 50 divided by 12 is 25, flak, 42 divided by 1 is 42. So those numbers there, the contribution per hour, they're the important ones. Since we're limited by the number of hours, we want to optimize, we want to maximize that contribution there. So the highest one is the flak. So that's my rank 1. That's what I'm going to focus on first. Leather is my second one, 40. And then sport is number 3. That's the least highest one. Okay, so then step 5, we're going to calculate how many hours I need for each product. So again, you've got the rows filled in where we're up to. So the expected demand of units, well, that's given to us in the question. 18,000 for leather, 10,000 for sport, 9,000 for flak. So to work out the hours that are needed, well, if we just look at leather, for example, it takes 1.5 hours per unit, and we expect to be able to sell 18,000 units. So times them together, and we should get 27,000 hours needed. Sport takes 2 hours per unit, and we expect to be able to sell 10,000. So sport will need 20,000 hours. Flak, 1 hour to make, 9,000 we expect to sell. So altogether, 9,000 hours are needed. So I'm going to fill in the bottom row there. Okay, but we know we've only got 33,000 hours. Okay, add those up at the bottom, that comes to more than 33,000. So we look at which ones do we focus on first, and this is where the rank order becomes important. So step 6, we make an optimum production plan. So to help us do this, I like to do this as a little list. So we remind ourselves that the hours we've got available is 33,000, and we're going to first of all do rank 1. So we're going to do flak first. So from that 33,000, I'm going to take away the hours needed for flak. So I'm going to take away 9,000, and that's going to leave me with 24,000 hours left. And that's the hours that's left to do my rank 2, which is the leather. So leather needs 27,000 hours altogether. However, I've only got 24,000 remaining. So I can't do all the leather jackets, so I can only do some of them. So to work out how many I can do, well, a leather jacket takes 1.5 hours. I've got 24,000 hours remaining, so I can do 24,000 hours divided by 1.5 to get 16,000 jackets. So I can make 9,000 flak, I can make all their demand. However, I can't meet the 18,000 demand for leather. I can only make 16,000 of them. And then I can't make any of sport. I've got no hours left for sport. So my optimum production plan looks like this. So I'll list my 3 jackets in order of the rank order. So flak came first. I can make 9,000 units, which took 9,000 hours. Leather, I couldn't make all 18,000. I could only make 16,000, and that took 24,000 hours. And I've got no hours left to make any sport. And that will get me all 10 marks.